There is something about a quiet Saturday morning that makes you believe everything in your life has finally fallen into place. I was sitting in my apartment in Seattle, coffee in hand, watching the rain tap gently against the window. 15 years of struggle, loneliness, and rebuilding had led me here. I had a career, a woman who loved me, and peace. Then my phone rang. An unknown number. A voice I had not heard in 15 years. My mother. And just like that, the past came crashing back. Before I share what happened next, let me know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. If this story resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. What would you do if the family who left you behind suddenly came back asking for money? Stay with me because this story still makes my blood boil every time I think about it. To understand why that phone call shattered my peace, I need to take you back to where it all began. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and secrets did not stay secret for long. My childhood home was not a happy one. My parents, Linda and Donald, fought constantly, shouting matches at dinner, slammed doors at midnight, silence that stretched for days. I was a sensitive kid, always trying to be the peacemaker, always hoping that if I was good enough, quiet enough, perfect enough, they would stop fighting. The only person who made me feel truly safe was my grandmother, Ruth. Grandma Ruth lived about 20 minutes away, and her little house was my sanctuary. She taught me how to make her famous apple pie from scratch. She would sit with me on her porch swing and tell me stories about her own life, about resilience, about getting through hard times. One thing she said to me has stayed with me my entire life. She looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You are stronger than you know. Never forget that." I held on to those words like a lifeline. I did not realize how much I would need them. When I was 17 years old, my world fell apart. My parents had their worst fight yet. Dishes shattered. Words were screamed that could never be taken back. And then just like that, it was over. My father, Donald, packed a single suitcase and walked out the front door. He did not say goodbye to me. He did not leave a phone number or an address. He simply vanished from my life as if I had never existed. I stood at the window and watched his car disappear down the street, and I felt something inside me break. But the worst was yet to come. My mother moved on quickly. Too quickly. Within months, she was dating a man named Frank. Frank was older, wealthy, and lived in California. He owned a chain of auto dealerships and drove a fancy car. My mother was smitten. She started talking about starting fresh and new beginnings. I assumed I would be part of those new beginnings. I was wrong. One evening, my mother sat me down at the kitchen table. She told me she was moving to California to be with Frank. I asked when we were leaving. She could not meet my eyes. "You are almost 18, she said. "You can take care of yourself. I need to start over." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. I begged her to let me come. I promised I would not be any trouble. I would get a job. I would stay out of their way. But Frank had made it clear there was no room for me in their new life. "It is not personal," my mother said. "It is just how things have to be." She left 2 weeks later. I stood in the driveway of our rented house and watched her drive away, just like I had watched my father drive away months before. I was 17 years old, completely alone with no money, no family, and no idea how I was going to survive. Those next few years were the hardest of my life. I found a tiny studio apartment that I could barely afford. I worked 3 jobs while finishing high school. I washed dishes at a diner from 5 in the morning until 8. I went to school. Then I delivered pizzas until midnight. On weekends, I stocked shelves at a warehouse. I slept maybe 3 or 4 hours a night. I was exhausted all the time, but I refused to give up. Then when I was 19, I got a phone call that brought me to my knees. Grandma Ruth had passed away. A stroke, they said. Quick and painless. But there was nothing painless about losing her. She was the only person in the world who had ever truly loved me, and now she was gone. I flew back to Ohio for the funeral, using every penny I had saved. I stood by her graveside in a suit I had bought at a thrift store, and I cried harder than I had ever cried in my life. Do you know what made it worse? My mother did not come. She did not fly back for her own mother's funeral. She sent a flower arrangement and a card that said, "With deepest sympathy." That was it. No phone call, no apology, no explanation. Just flowers and a card, as if Grandma Ruth's life could be summed up with a generic sympathy message. I stood alone at that grave and made a promise to myself and to my grandmother. I would make something of my life. I would be the man she always believed I could be. And I did. I worked harder than ever. I applied for scholarships and got into a state university. I studied computer science, surviving on ramen noodles and determination. I graduated with honors. A tech company in Seattle offered me a job, and I took it without hesitation. I left Ohio and never looked back. Over the next decade, I built a career I was proud of. I became a senior software engineer. I bought my own apartment. I met a woman named Sophia who saw me for who I really was and loved me anyway. For the first time in my life, I was happy. I was at peace. I thought the painful chapter of my life was closed forever. I was wrong. That phone call on that quiet Saturday morning changed everything. My mother's voice came through the speaker, dripping with sweetness I did not trust. "Sweetheart," she said, as if she had not abandoned me 15 years ago. "It is so good to hear your voice." I did not respond with warmth. I asked her bluntly what she wanted. There was a pause, and then she launched into small talk. How was I doing? How was work? Was I seeing anyone? She spoke as if 15 years of silence had never happened, as if she had not chosen a new life over her own son. I cut through her act and asked again what she wanted. She told me that my sister Ivy was getting married. Sister. I almost laughed at the word. Ivy was the daughter my mother had with Frank. She was born a year after my mother moved to California. I had never met her. I had never spoken to her. She was a stranger who happened to share half my DNA. But my mother spoke about her as if I should care, as if I had been part of their family all along. My mother said she wanted me to reconnect with the family by attending the wedding. She talked about how important family was, how life was too short for grudges. She said, "Let bygones be bygones." I could not believe what I was hearing. Bygones. She had thrown me away like garbage when I was 17 years old. She had not spoken to me in 15 years. And now she wanted to pretend none of that had happened. I told her no. I told her I did not have a family. The line went silent, and then she started crying. She called me cruel. She called me ungrateful. She said she had done her best, and I had no right to judge her. I hung up the phone and sat there in my apartment, shaking with anger and something else I could not quite name. Maybe grief. Maybe the ghost of the 17-year-old kid who had desperately wanted his mother to choose him. A few days later, I received a message on Facebook. It was from Ivy. Her profile picture showed a young woman with blonde hair and a bright smile. She looked nothing like me. Her message was long and earnest. She said she had always wanted a big brother. She said our mother had told her about me and she had always wondered what I was like. She said her wedding was coming up and it would mean the world to her if I could be there. I did not know what to feel. Part of me was suspicious, but another part of me remembered that Ivy was just a baby when all of this happened. She had not chosen any of this. She was not the one who abandoned me. Sophia, my girlfriend, noticed me staring at my phone. When I told her about the message, she was cautious. She told me to be careful to not let my emotions cloud my judgment. But she also said that only I could decide what was right for me. After a week of thinking, I decided to fly to California to meet them. Maybe I was curious. Maybe some small part of me still hoped for something I could not name. Whatever the reason, I booked a flight and told Ivy I would come. We met at an upscale restaurant in a wealthy suburb of Los Angeles. My mother was already there when I arrived along with Frank and Ivy. I barely recognized my mother. She had aged, of course, but it was more than that. Her hair was dyed an unnatural shade of blonde. She wore expensive jewelry that clinked when she moved. Frank sat beside her, heavier than I expected, with the smug look of a man who was used to getting what he wanted. And Ivy was exactly what her picture suggested. Pretty, polished, dressed in designer clothes. But there was something in her eyes that seemed hollow, like she had never had to work for anything in her life. The dinner started awkwardly. My mother made small talk. Frank barely looked at me. Ivy smiled a lot, but said little of substance. Slowly, the conversation shifted to the wedding. Ivy was marrying a man named Bradley, the son of a wealthy family. The wedding was going to be at a resort on the coast. There would be 300 guests. Ivy's dress was being custom designed. The honeymoon would be in Europe. They talked about these details as if they were telling me about the weather, and I sat there wondering why they were sharing all of this with me. Then, at the end of the meal, my mother put down her fork and looked at me with an expression I could not read. "We need you to pay for the wedding," she said. I thought I had misheard. I asked her to repeat herself. Frank cleared his throat and explained. His business had failed 2 years ago. They had burned through their savings trying to save it. They were in debt. They could not afford the wedding Ivy had always dreamed of. And since I was successful now, it was only right that I help my family. My family. The words felt like a slap. My mother leaned forward. "You owe this to us," she said. "We gave you life. If Grandma Ruth were alive, she would want you to help your sister." I felt the blood drain from my face. She had the nerve to bring up Grandma Ruth. The woman she had not even bothered to bury. The woman whose funeral she had skipped. She was using my grandmother's memory to manipulate me into giving them money. $150,000 to be exact. That was how much the wedding would cost. Ivy chimed in, her voice shifting to something whiny and entitled. "Please," she said. "I have been dreaming of this wedding my whole life. You are my only hope." I looked around the table at these 3 people who called themselves my family. My mother, who had abandoned me. Frank, who had refused to give me a place in their home. Ivy, who had never once tried to contact me until she needed something. And I realized something important. They did not see me as family. They saw me as an ATM. I told them no. I said it calmly and clearly. I told them I did not owe them anything. I had built my life from nothing without any help from them, and I was not about to hand over my hard-earned money for a wedding for a stranger. My mother's face twisted. The tears came again, but this time they looked rehearsed. She called me heartless. She said I was punishing her for one mistake she made years ago. Frank leaned across the table and lowered his voice. "We can make things difficult for you," he said. "People talk. Families have ways of making their voices heard." But it was Ivy who shocked me the most. Her sweet demeanor vanished in an instant. Her face went cold. "I knew you were selfish," she said. "Mom always said you only cared about yourself. You were never really part of this family anyway." Those words cut deeper than I expected. Not because they were true, but because they revealed the truth about who these people really were. Ivy did not want a brother. She wanted a checkbook. And my mother had clearly been poisoning her against me for years, telling her stories that painted me as the villain. I stood up from the table. I put cash down for my portion of the meal, and I walked out of that restaurant without looking back. But that was not the end of it. A few days after I returned to Seattle, my phone started blowing up with notifications. Ivy had posted on Facebook and Instagram telling a completely twisted version of events. She wrote about her estranged brother, who was rich and successful, but refused to help his family. She painted herself as a heartbroken bride whose own brother had abandoned her. She wrote about how she had reached out with love and been rejected with cruelty. The comments poured in. Friends of Ivy called me terrible things. Distant relatives I had never met sent me angry messages. Strangers found my profile and told me I should be ashamed of myself. My mother posted her own version of events talking about how she had sacrificed everything to raise me, and now I had turned my back on her in her time of need. I sat in my apartment reading message after message, feeling the anger and helplessness build inside me. Sophia sat beside me holding my hand. Marcus, my best friend since college, called to check on me. They both told me to stay calm, to not engage, to let it blow over. But I could not just sit there and let these people rewrite history. I could not let them turn me into the villain of a story where I was the victim. I thought about Grandma Ruth. I thought about her words. "You are stronger than you know." And I made a decision. I would not stay silent. I would not let them win by default. I would tell the truth. I went to my closet and pulled out an old box I had kept for years. Inside were letters my grandmother had written me, yellowed with age. There were photographs of us together, of her little house, of the life I had before everything fell apart. And there was a journal I had kept as a teenager, where I had written down everything that happened in painful, honest detail. I sat down at my computer and began to write. I wrote a post that told the real story. I wrote about being 17 years old and watching both my parents leave. I wrote about my mother choosing Frank over me. I wrote about working 3 jobs to survive. I wrote about standing alone at my grandmother's grave while my mother sent flowers from across the country. I wrote about 15 years of silence broken only when they needed money. I did not use cruel words. I did not insult them. I simply told the truth, and I included photos of my grandmother's letters as proof. I ended the post with these words: "I do not owe anything to people who abandoned me when I needed them most. Family is not about blood. It is about who stays." I posted it and walked away from my computer. I did not know what would happen. I did not know if anyone would believe me. But for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. The response was overwhelming. My post was shared thousands of times. People who had sent me angry messages now sent apologies. Friends of Ivy turned on her, demanding to know why she had lied. Relatives reached out to me, some for the first time ever, saying they had no idea what really happened. Ivy deleted her posts and made her accounts private. My mother called me over and over, but I did not answer. Then I received a message from Bradley, Ivy's fiancé. He told me he had read my post. He said he had no idea about any of this. He said he was reconsidering everything. A week later, I heard through the grapevine that the engagement was off. The extravagant wedding that was supposed to cost $150,000 was canceled. Ivy and my mother were left to deal with the consequences of their own choices. In the days and weeks that followed, I expected to feel victorious. I expected to feel satisfied, like I had won some great battle. But the truth was more complicated than that. I felt lighter, yes. But I also felt a deep sadness that I could not shake. I was sad because I finally had to accept what I had always known but never wanted to admit. I did not have a family. Not the one I was born into anyway. The people who should have loved me and protected me had failed me in every possible way, and no amount of success or vindication could change that. Sophia was my rock during those difficult weeks. She did not try to fix me or tell me how to feel. She simply sat with me, held me when I needed it, and reminded me that I was not alone. Marcus dragged me out of the apartment to go fishing, to watch football games, to do normal things that reminded me life goes on. Slowly, I started to feel like myself again. I also made a decision that changed my life. I started seeing a therapist. For the first time ever, I talked to a professional about my childhood, about the abandonment, about the grief I had carried for so long. My therapist helped me understand something important. What happened to me was not my fault. I was not abandoned because I was unworthy of love. I was abandoned because my parents were broken people who made broken choices. Their failure said everything about them and nothing about me. I began the process of letting go. Not forgetting, never forgetting, but releasing the anger that had lived inside me for so long. I wrote a letter to my mother. I poured out everything I had ever wanted to say. The pain, the confusion, the years of wondering why I was not enough. And at the end, I wrote that I forgave her, not for her sake, but for mine. I told her that I no longer needed her in my life, and I wished her well on whatever path she chose. I never sent that letter. Instead, I burned it. I watched the paper curl and blacken, and I felt the chains around my heart begin to loosen. It was not magic. The pain did not disappear overnight. But it was a start. 6 months later, I asked Sophia to marry me. She said yes. We had a small wedding, just our closest friends. Marcus was my best man. There was no one from my biological family in attendance, and I did not feel any emptiness because of it. Instead, I felt full of love for the woman standing beside me, full of gratitude for the friends who had become my true family. There was one thing I did to honor the past. At our wedding, I set up a small table with a photograph of Grandma Ruth. In the picture, she was smiling, standing on her front porch, looking exactly as I remembered her. It felt like she was there with us, watching over me, proud of the man I had become. I learned something powerful through all of this. Blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family. No one has the right to demand anything from you simply because you share DNA. Your worth is not determined by the people who failed to love you. And forgiveness is not about letting someone off the hook. It is about freeing yourself from the weight of carrying their sins. If you are out there right now feeling abandoned, feeling like you were not enough for the people who should have loved you, I want you to hear this. You are enough. You always were. The people who left, that is their loss, not yours. You have the power to build a new life, a new family, a new story. And that story can be beautiful. I am sitting in my apartment in Seattle as I tell you this. Sophia is in the next room humming to herself while she cooks dinner. The rain is tapping against the window again. And I am at peace. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who only came back into your life when they needed something? How did you handle it? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story touched you, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next story. And remember, the family you choose is just as real as the family you were born into. Sometimes it is even more real. Thank you for being here with me today. I hope you carry a little more peace in your heart as you go about your day. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other.